Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Smart Human Podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Theodora Scarato, who is Executive Director of Environmental Health Trust, which is a nonprofit scientific think tank that promotes healthier environment through research, education, and policy. Today, we're talking EMF science, health risks, as well as earpods, cell phone cases, Bluetooth, and ways to reduce EMF radiation exposure. So stay tuned. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Smart Human Podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with my colleague, Theodora Scarato, who is Executive Director of Environmental Health Trust. Environmental Health Trust is a nonprofit scientific think tank that promotes a healthier environment through research, education, and policy, carries out cutting-edge research on environmental health hazards, and also works directly with communities, health and education professionals, and policymakers to understand and mitigate these hazards. Theodora has published several research papers, including a paper on reducing EMF exposures in buildings entitled Building Science and Radiofrequency Radiation, What Makes Smart and Healthy Buildings in 2020. She has also co-authored, along with several eminent scientists, a major state of the science review paper on children's health entitled Wireless Technologies, Non-Ionizing Electromagnetic Fields and Children, Identifying and Reducing Health Risks, which was published in 2023 in Current Problems in Pediatric and Adolescent Healthcare. She is the lead policy analyst for EHT's database of international policy actions to mitigate wireless and EMF health risk, and has lectured at the National Institutes of Health, the University of California, San Francisco, as well as several international conferences. Thank you, Theodora. The list goes on and on of your accomplishments, but we'll have your full bio in the description of our talk today. But I want to welcome you for taking the time and really want to dive into this really important conversation. So thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, and thanks for all your incredible work on environmental health and educating people about this issue that I certainly didn't know about a decade ago when I came onto it.
Right. So it takes a village, and you're part of the village that I feel like I've gathered over the years, just getting to know the issues, because myself included didn't know a lot of this information, about 10 years ago as well. So let's just jump right in. We're really talking about EMF radiation, but let's talk about the big picture first. How big of a problem is this? How many people have cell phones, laptops, computers, tech toys, the Wi-Fi of everything in the U.S. and worldwide?
Well, now the question is, who doesn't have a cell phone? So the median age, I don't know if you remember, but I remember when kids didn't have cell phones. Even high schoolers didn't have cell phones, only if they were in a certain group or maybe they had a special job. Now the median age is like below 10.
Right.
And, you just go in the grocery store and there are kids on their parents' devices. We have iPads on laps. We have schools where we have all manner of devices, not to mention there's the phone, the laptop, the wireless earbuds, the smartwatch. It's on. And I think people have said, what technology, what environmental exposure has so rapidly penetrated every aspect of our lives into every age group, starting from before, kids are born. So what? Nothing so quickly has done that. And so we have not kept up with the safety. The safety regulations have not caught up with this really fast developing technology. So
it's worldwide. It's crept into every part of a society, but it's not even just limited to the U.S. We're talking worldwide connectivity.
Worldwide.
I saw a couple years back for the book Non-Toxic that we put together, Fred Vom Saal and I, we were at 5 billion devices, 5 billion. I think that has rapidly expanded in terms of, and I think that was just cell phones. So when you think about certain countries where I think in India, people have more than one cell phone. So you're talking about not even just one per person. There's an enormous number of people having multiple cell phones in addition to other tech toys that utilize this kind of technology.
Yes.
So,
And
yeah, no, I mean, it's just shocking, and it doesn't seem to be stopping anytime soon. So why don't you give us a little background on what is EMF radiation? What does EMF stand for? How is it different from microwave radiation? And then get into why do we name them 2G, 3G, 4G, and 5G? If you can just give the very basics for this audience.
Okay, great. So electromagnetic radiation is electric and magnetic fields, and there is a spectrum of electromagnetic radiation. But you're going to hear the words EMFs a lot, and that generally refers to what we're talking about now, which is the non-ionizing part of the spectrum. The spectrum ranges from power lines to cell phones to infrared, all the way up to atomic energy and X-rays. But the non-ionizing is not X-rays, not atomic bombs or nuclear weapons, but lower frequency waves. And when your phone communicates to the tower, it's using a wireless signal that is an electromagnetic wave, which actually is carrying that data. It's like invisible highways in the air. And these invisible signals are penetrating into our bodies, which is something you can't see, you can't hear, you can't smell, but it's very much there.
Mm.
And the way our limits are set, and if you sort of Google it and you're on the road of understanding it, you'll read, well, it's non-ionizing, so it's safe. Our government limits protect us. But actually, as we'll talk about, there are hundreds of studies that indicate low levels of non-ionizing radiation is not so safe because it's associated with so many health and biological impacts. So one other thing you'll hear is radiofrequency or microwave. So within the non-ionizing EMF spectrum, there's swatches are called different names, and radiofrequency is the carrier waves for wireless. So when I talk about wireless, we're talking about radiofrequency. Mm-hmm. If you decide to hop into the PubMed, which some of you might, you don't just want to look up wireless or Wi-Fi, you want to look up radio frequency or RF. Yep.
Maybe I can show you. Can you see this, Theodora?
Yes.
So this is basically, if people wanted to screenshot this, I don't know if it's backwards actually, but
no, I can see it.
You can see it perfectly. Okay, so basically, I thought this was a pretty good way of describing where, this technology is kind of based in the middle of this range in there with microwave ovens.
Right. So microwaves, they use a lot of terminologies, and
right.
It seems complicated, but actually it's quite simple. It's wireless, it's radio frequency, and it's microwave frequencies. So the frequency of your microwave is actually what's used for Wi-Fi. Mm-hmm. Only it's different than your microwave oven because it's much less power. So it's not going to heat your brain in the same way. However, that doesn't mean it's benign. So you'll hear microwave, radio frequency, wireless, and microwave ovens are just to heat food, so they're very high power. Whereas the microwaves used for cell phones carries data. It's actually modulated. It's biologically has different impacts because there's other characteristics to the signal, which I won't go on to today, but you can learn more at Environmental Health Trust if you're interested in that. It's pulsed.
It's pulsed. And how many pulses, I remember talking about this previously when I was learning about this, how many pulses per second is estimated?
Oh, there's can be so many pulses in microseconds. I mean,
900 times per minute is what I was quoted for some towers to reach your phone. But that can vary, of course, right?
And it can even be more with the newer technologies, which have a very high pulsation. And also the pulse is not like a regular pulse. Like it can be very erratic. Like,
right.
Now I'm going much slower than it's actually going.
Right.
But the erratic nature of the signal is actually part of why scientists are stating it impacts our bodies, because our cells are being impacted by these waves, which are coming at the various tissues. Some, when you hold the phone up to your head, You're getting an intense rate of absorption right there near where the phone is. When you put it in your bra, which many women do, or you put it in your spandex pants, right? How many people, or even texting like this, right? You're holding it up, you're texting. The kid is holding it in the grocery cart, watching the movie. There are sometimes antennas all around the edge of the phone, and those are putting out the signal to reach the tower, but it's going through your body.
Interesting. And our bodies are electrical to begin with. So that as a very, very basic commentary. But 2G, 3G, 4G, these are considered generation is what G stands for. Is that correct?
Yeah, that has to do with like the technology itself. It's called a modulation. So you can, remember when it was just voice calls, right? And you didn't have a phone like this. You might have had, then you had the flip phone where you could do that little funny texting where every key was something. Then there became screen, like where you could see things, but it wasn't like it is now. Now we can surf the internet. Every phone has numerous antennas on it, and you'll often have, with the new phones, a 5G antenna for a lot of data streaming, and also a 4G antenna, and you might even have what are 3G antennas, depending on the phone. So we're at 5G now. Most technology is running on 3G, 4G, 5G. They're trying to move to 5G, but it's not replacing 4G.
Right.
It is in addition to.
Which means that there's some questions also as we get further into this discussion about synergizing of some of the problems that can happen when you have both 4G and 5G running at the same time. That can pose an issue, but again, the science is kind of young on that particular aspect as well. Did you want to comment on?
There are few studies that have looked at real world exposures. So we have studies that we can talk about that took, animals in a lab, exposed them to 2G and 3G, found increased cancer, like the National Toxicology Program.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Let's go right into it, because these are the things that people are like, oh, is this real, or is this, international? Is this, who's going after the world of EMF radiation, and how much science is there? And then to talk about the NTP study, among others, is really important.
Great. Well, when cell phones were first developed and coming on the market like they are now, we didn't have any long-term studies that looked at what's the long-term health effect. And actually, the U.S. government set their limits based on the assumption that as long as it's non-ionizing, heating is the only harm. So as long as it doesn't overheat like a microwave, the limits will be adequately protective. So the FDA, and there'd been robust research by the Environmental Protection Agency and all across the world, actually, on this issue, looking at EMFs. So the EPA was defunded, and the FDA said, look, we don't have long-term studies. We need to know what is the long-term impact of cell phones. So they asked the National Toxicology Program to do its large-scale animal research studies on radiofrequency, on cell phone radiation. And that was a $30 million study. The first $5 million, Dr. Ronald Melnick designed the study at NIH, now retired, but he talks about how the setting up of that study was so important because they wanted to make sure that there weren't any other exposures to the animals, because there was a body of research associating long-term cell phone use with the phone to the head to the development of glioblastoma near on the side of the head where you held the phone. So you have these human studies, but you don't know for sure if there's other factors. So the animal research was really important. And the NTP, that was many years of work, and it was released in 2018, the final report, where they found that the animals, they exposed mice and rats to different frequencies, but the male rats had developed higher rates of gliomas of the brain, which are comparable to glioblastomas in humans, as people were getting associated with in studies. And then also acoustic schwannomas, or schwannomas of the heart in the rats, but in people, they were developing in the hearing nerve acoustic schwannomas. So same tissue type in the animals as in people who use cell phone long term.
Right. And they had a
This,
control group, which was so unusual, is what you were saying, is that they could control for confounders. So they had a much better setup
right.
for the study. So no one could say that it wasn't set up properly. They really worked hard to do that. And then the schwannomas are basically tumors that are wrapped around nerve sheaths, the myelin of nerve sheaths. So people can understand that. But
Yeah,
yeah, go on. So this was a pretty shocking outcome in terms of the final results.
it was. And at the same year, the Ramazzini Institute, which is in Italy and has studied, vinyl chloride and many other toxic exposures, then also released its findings, preliminary findings, actually its partial findings, I should say, from their large-scale rat study. So they did a similar study in that they had hundreds of animals. However, they used much less radiation than the National Toxicology Program. The National Toxicology Program study looked at that intense level when the phone is near your body,
Right.
and treated the whole animal. The Ramazzini Institute looked at a much lower level to mimic base station exposures, meaning cell tower exposures. Right. What are those ambient levels that are much lower? And they found the same tumor types. Now, what happened was that the FDA then stated that it disagreed with the findings of NIH, and there's a lot that went on, a lot of attacking of the studies, but there are many prominent scientists who are now coming out saying that, this research is what we needed. The animal research is needed so that the World Health Organization, International Agency for Research on Cancer, can make a new determination on the carcinogenicity, meaning the cancer causing, the science on does cell phone radiation cause cancer. So a lot of, I don't know if you mentioned that the World Health Organization, International Agency for Research on Cancer, classified this radiation as a possible carcinogen in 2011.
Right. Class 2B, possibly carcinogenic, but also that's in line with the 2B rating for DDT, lead, jet fuel, and engine exhaust. So there's a whole list of things that are listed under the IARC, which is part of the World Health Organization. So, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was their original statement. Did they change it from possibly?
So the way it works is the scientists have to convene, look at all the science, and make a new determination. Several of the scientists who made that determination, they were invited WHO experts, now say the science, because of the animal research of the National Toxicology Program of NIH and the Ramazzini Institute and other studies, that the level should be increased. However, they have not met.
It wouldn't be 2A to probably?
To probable, and some say proven, depending on what scientists are looking at. And that redetermination has not happened, but the advisory council to the WHO has made it as a recommendation. So this can take years. It takes years to set up that meeting, and then years to, have it, get all the things together, and then they have their meeting. So that has not been scheduled as far as I know, but it is on the list.
Interesting. And again, when you say the word time to do this and time to do that, it takes time to do the studies. It takes millions of dollars to get the studies organized. Then you have, the people that refute the information, primarily, by the way, a lot of industry studies, which are slanted often towards the safety as opposed to the issues. I know I wrote about that a few years back.
Yep.
But the idea is that, how much time do we all have? It's like, by the time we get to these answers, we'll have had another 10 years under our belt. And I think it's really important to understand that most of what you do in terms of educating and what I do is to get people to do this on their own as fast as possible in terms of precautionary principle changes, so that instead of waiting for an authoritative body to tell you what to do, that we make smarter decisions, over this time period where people are waiting for these meetings to make conclusions. And I don't think it's much to ask. I mean, have you found that, these studies have added more weight to the conversation, I would imagine?
The scientists are saying that this has added very important weight. There's also a Yale study that looked at thyroid cancer that found people that used cell phones heavily to their
Mhm.
head
Mhm.
had increased thyroid cancer if they had certain genetic dispositions. And like you said about time, I mean, a lot of the studies, science always lags behind real
Mhm.
world. So these
Mhm.
studies were looking at heavy use of 30 minutes a day. Now,
Right.
where are we now, right? Then it takes time to gather the data, time to analyze it, time to publish it, and we're way behind. And so that is why we recommend prevention.
Right.
Keep the phone at a distance. I mean, there's so many things that can be
Yeah.
done.
You have a ton of them. I know we were on a couple other things together where, you really just knocked out some really great suggestions, but I want to save that for the end because I want to just get a little bit more into the weeds here. Let's talk about what are the health related impacts from exposure, because we all know we're on the phone more than 30 minutes a day, like you mentioned, right? They keep on moving the goalposts, in terms of some of these studies. So, we're now using a lot of this technology many hours a day. If we're lucky, less than 5 or 6, but we now have ways to measure that too. Why don't you share with the audience some of the health related, we talked about cancer, schwannomas, gliomas, really scary things. Maybe that was when the day was when we had flip phones and we were really putting the phone up to our ear as opposed to talking on speakerphone. But what are some of the health related issues that you can share?
Well, I'll talk about a few of the studies. So there's studies that have found increased headaches related to time on the phone. There's research that's looked at migraines and actually found that not the highest level, but regular levels of cell phone radiation can trigger migraines.
Mm-hmm.
There was a Thai study out of Thai researchers, and there's fertility impacts to, there's animal studies and human studies, but impacts to sperm, impacts to the chemical balance in the ovaries in animal studies. I would say memory damage is something that's actually what got me on board on this issue as a clinical social worker, was the studies that showed in animals when they were exposed to cell phone radiation, they had damaged brain cells and less brain cells. Now there's research in people, like a study that was a replication study done in Swiss teenagers, where they looked at 1 year of cell phone use and they tested the kids before on memory and a year later. And those that had the phone up to their head had damaged memory in the part of the brain that corresponded with the test they did. So they were testing the teenagers, and that was after 1 year of exposure. So impacts to the brain, fatigue, there's it's a whole body being exposed. Sometimes it's, more your head, but really there's all of your systems. There have been studies that have found various effects at varying degrees of research, right? Because the research on this has actually dried up in the United States. So we're really looking at European studies at this point, which is egregious. Like, our government should be looking at this issue in a much more robust way. That's an understatement.
Right. But of course, the bodies that manage some of the biggest industries in our country, the technology industry, it's, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I would just say that much of the funding that goes into these studies has to come from academic centers, third party, not actually the industry itself, because they don't police themselves and they're not required to, along with other chemicals and a bunch of other things in the United States. So we really look to other countries that don't have those restraints to a certain degree. So how are other countries doing with this topic? Give me an idea of how we've sort of evolved in certain progressive countries in terms of how to limit that exposure, not get rid of phones, not, ban cell phones and Wi-Fi, but really how do they incorporate safer, regulatory oversight into their communities, into their countries?
I'll give you some highlights. So Belgium and France have banned the sale of cell phones for young children under 6. And advertising to young children, and specifically because of the radiation health issues. Many countries have limits for what's allowed, like circulating in the air from towers and wireless systems, at 10 to 100 times more stringent than the US government. as another example. There are labeling that many countries do on the phone. So you buy the phone and it tells you the radiation level, or it even says, like in France, it actually says, keep away from the abdomen of adolescents and keep away from the pregnant abdomen. That's in the phone as part of the law from the ministers. And just to hop on a kind of a side important note, other countries are doing a better job, even if they have the same limits as the US. We have among the most lenient for cell tower radiation. Other countries are measuring the levels, taking phones off the market and testing them to make sure they really are what they say they are, just like with chemicals or other toxins,
How much they're emitting. In other words, how much radiation they're emitting without lying or overstating their marketing.
Yeah. Whereas in the US, we don't have any of that. So when France did that, they found the majority of phones, when they first released the findings in 2016, 80% exceeded limits when they were in body contact positions. And then France started testing the phones, touching the body. And this is like one little rabbit hole, but it's worth going into. We'll put a pin on it and come back. But phones are not tested touching the body. So when you take the phone and you go like this, right? You got like that. They're not tested that way. And they, in many instances, exceed our FCC limits. But the way our government limits are, you don't have to test touching the body. Because remember, way back, we used what were they called? The little, you put them on a holster on your body, like phones were not put in pockets.
Right. They were put around your waist. Everyone had a little cell phone holder.
Yeah.
You can still see a few people walking down the street. And you're like, wow, that's really cute. But they're usually 80 years old or 90 years old, those people. But yeah, you're right. And in fact, originally when they first tested for radiation, weren't they using the body habitus of like a soldier who was 220 pounds? Or 200 pounds. Tell us a little about the original testing for radiation. Like you said, it was based on heat and how much it would heat up the skin, which is really horrible because nowadays we have cases and a bunch of other materials that are used in phones and technology that actually offset heat, because of the matrix of that material. So that wouldn't even hold up today.
Let's talk about this. This is like, well, how are children more vulnerable? The first thing is that the way we even test phones is based on the 220-pound dummy, like a big phantom. They based it on the top percentage of Marines because this was really developed going way back for military purposes of this technology. So you have a big bowling ball of a head, a gigantic head that's filled with liquid based on the big man head. And then they test phones up to these gigantic heads with a homogeneous liquid. But brains are not homogeneous. They have different textures, and electricity travels differently through different textures. So more recent research shows there are hotspots that can develop in live brains, and that children absorb higher rates deeper into their brains from the same device. They are more vulnerable because their brains are still developing. So even if the radiation were the same, they're in development. And as you know, with chemical exposures or all of these environmental exposures, younger, when you're exposed younger, there can be more profound, more effects that can even happen. You won't even see it till later, right? I mean, some things don't display in the brain till later. So all of this is why the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends reducing children's exposure and actually made recommendations after the NIH National Toxicology Program study on ways to keep the phone away from the body and so forth that we'll talk about. But the way we test just doesn't make any sense.
Right. And that's from the 1970s, I want to say.
That was developed pre-1996, but in 1996, the FCC said, this is how we're doing it. So companies, when a phone's brought to market, they test one phone, not touching the body, and they even have a number, like how many millimeters away it is from the body if you search in the manual or in the settings of your phone.
Well, let's do that, because I remember one of your colleagues, Deborah Davis, who's also a huge part of Environmental Health Trust.
Yes.
I saw her for the first time at a lecture many years ago, and she had everyone take out at the conference, pull out their phones, and go through the process by which you can actually see the legal jargon from the phone company in terms of how to find out whether or not you should be keeping the phone a certain distance. Can you share that with us?
Yeah, well, you go into the settings, legal and regulatory, and then there should be a radio frequency radiation exposure. Another way you can do it is, actually, I have all this online on our fine print warning page, but you can, if you have an Apple phone, they actually have an RF exposure website. Samsung has a website.
Yeah.
It's a little it's a little challenging to find, but it actually says the distance. They sometimes call it the as tested distance. The language used to be much clearer. Now the language is a little challenging to read, but it says that there is this distance for the body testing. And that gives the distance that meets our FCC limits. But that does not mean safety, because those limits are from 1996. They have not been updated since. There's been no review of all of the science by any U.S. government agency. And just as an example, like my Samsung, when I first learned about it, was 25 millimeters. My laptop was, it was several. I have to look this up, but I have some examples in front of me. Now, most Apple phones are at 5 millimeters.
Yes, I just wanted to mention that. If you go to general, and if you get your iPhone out, if you could do general, first you go to settings, then you go to general, then you scroll down, it says legal and regulatory, and then you can see RF exposure. And wouldn't you know it, after it gives you a little explanation about specific absorption rate and blah, 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 it says during testing, iPhone radios are set to their highest transmission levels, placed in positions that simulate uses against the head with no separation, and when worn are carried against the torso of the body with 5 millimeter separation. Yeah. So, they're trying to cover themselves in terms of, legal risk, trying to share some information, but that wasn't there 10 years ago or even 8 years ago.
Yeah, and I'll talk about this against the head with no separation just briefly. They have 2 positions that are standardized positions for the phone, and they make sure it's not ever touching your head, okay? It's the ear is a spacer, and every millimeter of distance counts when it comes to cell phone radiation, because there's the inverse square law. So it's much more when it's close. So when you're doing this, or how many people do this, right? They're walking around like that. This would be touching the head, which is not, that would be like the body testing. Like then you got the antenna right against the head. So we've actually been asking the companies to sort of come clean on this. Like tell people how you test them. Tell them, at least related to our FCC limits, people need to know this information and easy ways to just reduce exposure like other governments are doing.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And even like, for instance, people take for granted that laptops are basically cellular technology. We kind of take it for granted it's only the cell phone that's at risk when it comes close to our body. But when I go pick up my kids at their school, every single kid in, their homework room, or they're waiting for their parents, or they're just kind of hanging out, their laptops are on their lap. And I always said to myself, well, why would they do that? If your lap heats up and radiation, that's an antenna to your computer, you want to at least take a laptop computer and make it 12 inches away and put it on a table or a side chair. As a recommendation, but I'm saying that most people don't really think that the phone and the computer are, equivalent when it comes to radiation risk.
The laptops, and especially the newer laptops, also have cellular. The iPads have cellular Wi-Fi that is radio frequency, and we don't have long-term studies on kids using laptops in labs in schools to even look at. I wish we did, but that's why Israel, Belgium, Cyprus, they've actually banned wireless Wi-Fi in kindergartens, and some have restrictions in elementary school as well.
France came up with that as well. Yes, you're right, absolutely. Yeah. And they banned the use of cell phones during elementary school hours.
Yes, that's happening everywhere, right? Because of also the
social media issues.
The social media
Yeah.
and the impacts to education. But the radiation issue, like in France, they have the teachers hooked up with a Ethernet cord, so they don't need to use Wi-Fi, and they only turn on the Wi-Fi for the lesson if it's needed, if they don't have another setup. So in Israel, we had a conference where we had the Haifa Tech school manager come in and show how all the classes were actually hardwired, and how they limited the exposure, because if they should be on a table. In fact, the iPads used to have it a little bit clearer that the antennas should be positioned away from the body on the iPad. It was written in the manual.
Mm-hmm.
Now I don't even know if there are paper manuals that even exist anymore, but you can go online. It's all on Environmental Health Trust or Healthy Tech at Home Project, where we have links.
Well, we're going to some wonderful links to Environmental Health Trust and whatever papers. I think we should do the National Toxicology Program, the NTP program that you were talking about with their study, $30 million study. But I also want to mention people who carry their phones in their pockets when we talk about fertility. There's some really well done studies showing fertility quality and quantity being reduced when people carry around cell phones in their groin, male participants. And then also, as you mentioned, women who carry their phone in their bra, the finding of lesions, both benign and cancerous, that have been found where the antenna, which I actually looked it up, my antenna apparently is at the top of the iPhone. I was, maybe it's an older phone, the 10, but the idea is that I think the antenna, you can actually look to see where that specifically is in your phone, but it was actually correlated with where lesions were, where women were particularly carrying their phone in which position. So, am I right?
That's a published case study. Then there's actually a case control study that came out looking at many women where they kept their phone, and the ones who kept it closer to their abdomen area had higher rates of breast cancer. And it's an unusual kind of cancer that's developing. The case control, the case studies that were written up on these young women with no hereditary breast cancer. They're unusual multifocal tumors that are and they're right underneath where the phone was in the bra.
Right. It's hard to argue that it's from any other location because they're so specific. I mean, from any other issue, more like just a genetic component, because it's so specific to where that phone is being settled in their bra. I mean, these are the kinds of things that, as the science unfolds, as it surely will, hopefully, again, it's the precautionary principle of what do we do to reduce those exposures, so therefore reduce the risk of these illnesses associated. So is maybe now, I guess, well, before we get into the top ways that you would help to limit exposure, can I just jump in a couple quick questions? What is Bluetooth, and is that harmful to us?
Bluetooth is radio frequency, but at a much lower level, although the newer Bluetooth, if you notice, Bluetooth's gotten better and better. It goes farther and farther. Well, that means it's more powerful than it used to be. So Bluetooth is radio frequency. We don't have long-term studies on Bluetooth. Environmental Health Trust has done some simulations that show the penetration into the tissue. And it's a lot of times kids, right, they put it in their ears, and it's on their ears all day. So that's always emitting some radio frequency. And some of the newer earpods, they go from
earbuds,
earbuds go from one to the other, and then they go down to the phone. So you've got a transmission going between the two, which your head's in the middle, then going down to the phone, which, by the way, is often in the pocket, then is emanating out to the tower, and so forth. So we recommend using, as you have, wired earpieces. Air tube is best if you're using a phone. So, and actually putting it on speaker and setting it aside. And something else you mentioned about fertility, there's research showing decreased testosterone. And I find that when I talk to men about that, they really appreciate that and find it that's like, why mess with our hormones?
Right.
So
yeah, it's all, I have two two teenage boys, and if I tell you the battle, I mean, we have battle for everything, let me tell you. But they don't believe a word I say about anything
Right.
until someone at the gym tells them, which is what happened with the earbuds and the battle with the earbuds, where they're sneaking around, using their buddies' earbuds, and then I catch them or something, and I keep telling them, there's no reason for this. And then my older son, who's 16, said, "Oh yeah, the guy at the gym was like, yeah, that's really cool and really smart that you do not use earbuds because the radiation." And all of a sudden he stopped wanting the earbuds. So, the idea is that, it's hard as a parent, but,
Yep.
I think that kids are influenced by those around them. And so it's kind of an uphill climb when something like earbuds are so popular and everyone's getting them for holiday gifts and stuff. But yeah, again, it's the precautionary principle. It's the less exposure, the better. I mean, you still get the same outcome. It might just have a little bit of a wire around it. What's the big deal, right? So, yeah, it's a little stressful. I'm sure you have kids, right? So you have to
I have
manage.
one in college, one going to college this year, and I believe me, I'm aware of the challenge.
Right.
And I think that's why, raising awareness on this is so important.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, my daughter, I had girls in the car. This was like last year. So, I've been working on this for 10 years. It's not like I don't talk about it all the time.
Right.
And my daughter's good friend, I had picked them up from dance class, and she goes, "Theodora, you're not going to believe this. My period app, I kid you not, told me that the cell phone could impact fertility." And I was like, "Really?" She's like,
Yeah.
"Yeah, we shouldn't have the phone near our body." I'm like,
Yeah.
"Not that I haven't known you for, 7
Right.
years."
But it was a different source.
Yeah,
It was a more
yeah.
believable source, not someone who's done the research on it and published papers. Yeah, no, I'm in the same
I
boat.
know.
But it is a challenge, and so that's why maybe even sharing those videos or whatever social media that your kid happens to use. Sometimes I share videos that are made by someone else they might respect
Mhm.
on a more cultural social level than myself, and at least they can hear it from someone else. So we keep track, the battle continues, at home and abroad. And so I was going to ask you about earbuds, but you've really answered that question. So even in a car using Bluetooth so that you don't get into an accident, still a better choice, to some degree, right? Than actually having obviously the phone in your hand. But when you turn off the Bluetooth, it's probably still ongoing in your car. I mean, when you turn off the call, is that correct?
Well, it's like layers. It's like eating
Yeah,
healthy or cleaning up your house.
right.
You have layers of what you do, right? So you definitely don't want to have the phone to your head in a car for a lot of obviously you're going to get in an accident. Also, right near your body. You don't want the phone resting on your lap in a car. You've got metal surroundings. The radiation can reverberate. It can be more intense trying to get out of the car. So the best thing is to, obviously not use the phone in the car unless it's an emergency, or keep your calls short. Don't have the phone near your body, is one of the most important things. We definitely don't recommend streaming videos. You're going on a long car ride with your kids. Believe me, I have been there. I have driven many places, but have those videos or whatever you're doing pre-downloaded. So you're not streaming wirelessly outside and not on the lap. We had this thing that's sort of like hooked up to the back that held it. Of course, this was a bit ago, but you can have
Right.
something so it's not, right on your child's body. Because even when the wireless is off, which you want to turn the antennas off, especially in the car, there's magnetic fields. So anything electric has magnetic fields. That's why we want to keep electronics away from the body, kind of as a general rule.
Yeah.
No video game consoles right up to the bed. Like I went to my friend's house and the son had all these video game consoles right at the pillow. So I was like, whoa,
Right.
let's just,
Right. Right. Or even electrical cords. I mean, even in health and wellness and integrative medicine, we talk about, clearing your bedroom, spaces that you're going to be
yep.
sleeping during. Why would you have all these contraptions in your office? I mean, in your bedroom, if you can move them someplace else, to lower that EMF, that radiation throughout the night, and try to keep some of those electrical cords away from your bed because of even the low level of exposure from those electric appliances. But it just seems to make sense. And I think there's even hotels now, believe it or not, that are catering to people who are EMF sensitive. And they actually have hotel rooms in some of the big chains, I believe, I've heard this, that will actually cater to people who don't want Wi-Fi accessible space for their stay. Have you heard
Well,
that?
I know that in Europe that is happening, and
Yeah.
also that there was a big media firestorm about the fiance of the Snapchat
Hmm.
farmer who
Hmm.
had in her house. She has a switch to turn everything off at night and has eliminated the EMF from the bedroom to the degree possible. And I certainly know a lot of people who are doing doing that in their homes in order to reduce exposure that are among the Hollywood, the world of different world, right? But so people are doing it. There's
Right.
even hospitals where they
Yeah.
have low EMF rooms for people who are sensitive and developing a
Hmm.
constellation of symptoms of headaches and sleep problems, rashes, and so forth. So when they can get treatment, they're not then getting more electromagnetic radiation.
Yeah.
So
It makes
yeah.
sense. It makes sense, but it's retrospective. It's kind of like we look back with 2020 vision as to what we kind of did to ourselves. But what about, cases for phones? I want to make sure we mention that because they're so advertised throughout the internet and on social media, and every day there's another case to protect you. Or believe it or not, I saw a necklace, that people
Right.
were buying that reduced EMF exposure, and you just hang it around your neck, which you and I could both comment is probably really just not true. Because if it's a real true radiation signal, an EMF signal, it's going to work its way around any case until it gets to its landing spot, to the other antenna, right, from the cellular tower. So the only truly way to protect your phone from getting those signals, even with a case that doesn't really work potentially, is to turn it off. It's not a Faraday box like a microwave that we have in our home, which is completely sealed technically. Our cases are never completely sealed, so there's always going to be some need for that signal to get into the phone. Is that correct?
Yeah, and also there's so many different models, and we can't comment on anything. First we started looking at that many
Mm-hmm.
years ago, but now there's just so many things. Who can keep up? By the time the testing's done, they're on to a new product, and the problem is the government does not have a standardized way to test. Let's say that it did focus the beam out a little bit. We don't have any way to test that because there's no standardized way to test. And what I find is some people will buy them for their kids. Let's pretend this red were a block. Well, then the kid might turn it the opposite way and put them on them. They're not going to be watching which way do I turn it. And besides that, there are other people in the space, right? So it's all, as
Like
you
a false
said,
sense of security.
that's right.
We're trying to buy our anxiety down, when
Right.
in fact, our real money should be spent trying to figure out how to do just basic electronic cable and wiring the
Yes,
house without having to use Wi-Fi. I mean, it's sort of going backwards.
exactly.
Yeah. So give us, I guess, moving forward, that being said, what are your top 5 takeaways that we could do right this second to reduce exposure? You can give us more. I'm sure you have
Sure.
them, but just, share with this audience what you tell your communities and your family.
Sure. Well, the first thing to remember is to keep a distance. Distance is your friend. So don't put the phone up to your body, head, pants, and so forth. And the second would be to minimize your use. And there's a lot of choosing safer options or less radiating options. So instead of using the cell phone all the time for FaceTime, actually, I should talk about times when the phone goes to highest power. It's when you run videos or stream videos. So if you have to communicate with someone, don't have it be on FaceTime. Have it be by text if possible. That's less than a voice call. Voice is better than streaming video. So, or moving large files. I can actually attach my cell phone with a cord for a lot of what the Wi-Fi, instead of using the Wi-Fi, for example. Another tip is to turn antennas off when you're not using them. So if you're on cellular for something and you're not using Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, turn those antennas off on your phone. You can turn the phone on airplane mode more often.
Mm-hmm.
That turns off the antennas. Using Ethernet in your home and figuring out, do an assessment. Like, what do you have in your home that is wireless? Let's go through it and see what are some simple swaps, Start with those. What can you do where you can move things away? What can you even turn off at night so you can sleep and have a low EMF nighttime? Get your bedroom to be like a sleep sanctuary, we call it. Remove the cords, have your phone off and away. Don't have video games or other consoles. They actually emit all the time. Put them on a power strip, or the best is not to have them in the bedroom. But be aware that a lot of things emit even when they're off. Your phone emits even when it's off. When you're not using it, I should say.
When it's off or on airplane mode, you're in good shape. When
if you're on airplane mode, it's
completely
not
off or on airplane mode, you're fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
But don't sleep with the phone right near your head, which a lot of people do. So know when it goes to high and use less, turn it off when not in use, and use Ethernet as much as possible. So I'm connecting with you. It's a much better connection when you use wired Ethernet. So if you have an office or a place where you can hook that up, you just buy an adapter, and then the signal goes through the wire and not in the air. So we have a lot of tips and tricks at Healthy Tech at Home project, and you can learn different things to do. The one thing I'll say is that, it shouldn't be on us. And it ends up that we're doing all these things and our kids, trust me, don't want to know.
Right.
And it's kind of quite the challenge, but we really need our federal government to look at this issue. We have a regulatory gap in that there is no federal agency looking at all of the science and looking at those limits. We sued the government on this issue. We sued the FCC, and we were successful. We argued that the FCC had not looked at all the science that had been presented to them. They haven't reviewed or updated this based on children's vulnerability and long-term exposures, the studies on long-term exposures that we and other experts sent to them. So the US government and the FCC have been ordered to relook at all of the science that they were found to have ignored in our court case, which is Environmental Health Trust et al. Versus the FCC. And it's been 2 years and they have not responded. And so we want them to be accountable on this. I mean, just like with chemicals, like no more technology moving forward without proper pre-market safety testing and post-market surveillance, oversight and enforcement. We need all of these things that we don't have right now. So I also would encourage you to talk to your friends, families, and get involved on this issue. It's not going away. If anything, we're getting more. We're getting more technology, and it can be so much safer. Like they can do it. They just need. It's like the power of the purse. We just need to tell them as consumers, tell the companies too.
It's interesting. I had a case of a patient who was reaching out a couple of years back about this smart meter that he was being forced to have in his basement for his water and utility usage. And normally we have an analog where someone comes to the house, looks at the numbers and sends you a bill. So they were phasing that out. So this patient had written to me and said, listen, I have, believe it or not, one eye with vision, and this wireless can contribute to cataracts, and a litany of things that I had no idea about. And of course, when I researched, there was from the medical journals, there was a lot of truth to what this patient was describing. And it turns out I just got in the mail a letter from my electronics, my electric company, saying that they're now going to be using smart meters for my office. And, these are continuous meters. I mean, these aren't meters that turn off and on when you push the button. This is an automatic real-time, it says meter reading that will eliminate almost all estimate. I mean, they're just telling you it's so much better, in terms of power outages and storm restoration. And it's going to, but this is a continuous meter that's going to be,
right.
Not that we don't have Wi-Fi anyway in my office. I'm not going to be, a hypocrite, but I will just say that it's moving very fast, and there's not a lot I feel like I'm empowered to handle when it comes to even when you're renting. So it's just something that we're going to all have to think about in terms of, what we will allow as a culture and what we won't,
Yeah, and every layer, it's like more and more and more. Then there's 5G. They're putting antennas up. I mean, we're called constantly about people with cell towers, short cell towers called small cells that are being put up literally, 10 feet from the window. In New York City, all over, they're getting these jumbo 5G towers.
Right.
And some of them are at 9.5 feet from the window.
Well, that's because 5G now requires, because 5G, the way it works is my understanding is that they need more towers to be added across the country in order to manage the signaling. Because it can penetrate actually shorter distances, but deeper into buildings. Is that correct? So
well, so 5G is actually, if we're going to go down the 5G road, it's many different. 5G is like a marketing term. And if we look at 5G as the modulation, it actually uses lower bands that travel miles, but then it has high bands that don't travel as far with the data. So that's what you're talking about, where they're using the millimeter wave or sub-millimeter wave. And then they're using mid-band too. So the lower frequencies penetrate deeper. The higher frequencies don't penetrate as deep, but they do penetrate into the skin to a degree. So what's really happening is that there's all these applications, self-driving cars, and there's going to be drones dropping off prescriptions, and whatever it is that industry wants to do, they need to build those highways. They need to build out, according to the FCC and industry's estimates, 800,000 new poles or mounted facilities in the United States alone. They need to be in neighborhoods. They need to be close to where people live and work and play, the companies say for a reason. But it could be designed differently if we thought, hey, there's a public health issue here. How do we design our networks and our technology systems so we don't have to use it it doesn't need to be the way they're doing it.
Right.
You can get a lot of what they're offering. Like now they're having fixed wireless. That means that your router or modem will connect with a cell tower outside instead of going through the wire. Like you probably have a cable or DSL or some kind of fiber optic that's runs in the ground, or it's a wire. But actually companies are trying to move everything to wireless, which means more signals in the air. It's less regulated and it's cheaper for them.
I once wrote, I know we're going to wrap up pretty soon, but I remember someone taking a picture of the mall in Washington, D.C., this big expansive mall, and they had kind of overlaid sort of the all the radiation that was crisscrossing the mall, and that if it had color or visibility and you could actually see what was transferring in our environment in terms of radiation, it would really change what's going on. But the fact that we can't see, feel, taste, touch radiation, similar to, of course, I'll extrapolate to chemicals, but I mean, the idea is that if we could see, touch, and feel it, we'd probably have a lot more to say about, how quickly this has expanded and continues to expand in terms of our exposures to, human and wildlife and nature and all that. So, it's daunting to some degree. Are you hopeful for the future? I mean, tell me.
I am hopeful and inspired, actually.
Not based on what I just said, but other than what I just said, you are hopeful and inspired. Okay. Tell us why.
Yeah,
Tell us. Inspire us. Yeah.
People are passing resolutions, working in their communities. And I really feel that as people get more educated on this, it's pretty simple. It's like, there's all of this science. There's scientists saying there's a problem. There's some scientists saying there's not, but why risk it? Let's take precautions now. And, a lot happening internationally on this issue. I think our lawsuit was a really big win, and we're doing some follow-up legal work to really get the government agencies to be doing what they need to be doing. So absolutely. And those images are really great. You can look them up. They simulated the waves in the air. And if you go to Environmental Health Trust, our YouTube, we actually have the simulations by engineers showing the penetration into the brain and also into the reproductive organs and into parts of the body. We have some new simulations. These are high level, using, state-of-the-art equipment that the FDA actually uses for some of its products in order to show the rate of absorption into the body. But we have some where we're simulating the phone going like this, where you can see the intense levels into the breast and then also into the hand. And I know we don't have time to go into all of this, but when your body tissue is soaking this, is absorbing this, you have to remember it's not just the public health issue and the health issue, it's also energy wasting.
Right.
So 5G and these newer systems use a lot more energy. And that's like a whole other level, or the other environmental life cycle issues, which we think are really important too. It all comes around, right? So,
right. No, I'm happy you're, the way I see it is that, similar to like turf, soccer, sports turf, which I just interviewed someone on and hopefully we'll release at some point. We got into it. Everyone was very excited about this topic. It gained traction. I mean, everyone wanted the nicest, newest turf for any high school, college.
Yep.
And now we're seeing pushback, and we're seeing that some of the results of that could be harmful in terms of the chemicals and the exposures to those on the field. So I think like the pendulum seems to always flip back. The question is, do we have time for this when you're talking about health-related issues that are encroaching? So, I just encourage people to ask questions, talk to their local, utility companies, talk to their schools and principals and sports groups, and anything that involves something their exposure affects you or your family. I just think asking questions is always smart. Even if you're not making an actual dent immediately, it moves the pendulum forward. So, Theodora, thank you so much for being here for this wonderful discussion. I thought it was really comprehensive. And of course, there's just so much more that you, as the director of EH Trust, Environmental Health Trust, can really share with us when you go to the website, correct?
Yes, ehtrust.org. And also you can go to Healthy Tech at Home Project, which is where we have just like simple steps. And then we kind of go more in depth as well on what you can do, changes you can make, your own use of technology, your kids' use of technology. And we also have a section on medical organization recommendations too, and downloadable fact sheets. It's all online. And we hope you'll sign up for our newsletter too at Environmental Health Trust so you can stay connected. We just are releasing, for example, a scientific webinar that we did on impacts to birds, bees, and trees, which is a whole other important issue, right? So.
Right. And then there's also Baby Safe Project. Have you guys worked?
Oh, yes. The Baby Safe
Project. In terms of pregnancy and having any risk to a growing fetus, there's a lot of really simple recommendations in regards to exposure during that prenatal and natal period. So
it's so easy. Like actually, some of the things you can just do that are easy can eliminate so much of your daily exposure right off the bat. Some require like looking things up and buying the this and that. And I did those things and I wish I'd done them sooner. But the easy stuff, it's like.
Right. It's just behavior. It's just mild, just some behavioral changes. And once you do them, they stick.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate all that you came to the table offering in terms of your information on this topic, which is confusing. And I think, people are so frightened of not having their technology for social media and for those issues, which we didn't dive into, but, in terms of the radiation, I think it lingers in our minds. So thank you so much for sharing all those details and information. And I look forward to reading more about what Environmental Health Trust is doing and some of the studies that they're involved in, and really keeping this a positive conversation with hopefully change in the future. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.